You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
We are taking African combat sports global. Put it simply, we are building Africa's UFC, the biggest combat sports platform on the continent. We've done a lot in terms of taking this sport and building the platform for it. A lot of that has been very much doing that in step with preserving the culture of the sport. Although this is very much an African product, it has global relevance. Our biggest markets are Nigeria, the US, and Brazil. Ultimately, Dambe is very much, as I've mentioned, a traditional sport. So we have to be alive to cultural sensitivities.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today we have Maxwell Kalu, founder of the African Warriors Fighting Championship, which is the leading promoter of indigenous African combat sports, primarily Dambe. Its mission is to offer opportunities to African athletes and take Africa's ancient fighting traditions to the world. Welcome to the podcast, Maxwell.
Thank you for having me, Tessa. Happy to be here.
Before we get started, I was hoping you could give us an introduction into who Maxwell Kalu is.
Yeah, so I'm Maxwell Kalu, founder, CEO of the African Warriors Fighting Championship. As you said in your introduction, African Warriors, we are taking African combat sports global. Put it simply, we are building Africa's UFC, the biggest combat sports platform on the continent. And sort of, for myself, Maxwell, I'm a lifelong combat sports fan. Also, I spent some time competing in combat sports. And I sort of took that love of the game as a fan, as a sort of sometimes competitor, and saw this exciting market opportunity when it comes to combat sports on the continent. If you look around, this is going back in terms of when we started it, which was about 2018. For me, the opportunity was clear. We had Africans, particularly Nigerians, competing at the highest level of every combat sport, be it boxing, thinking about your Anthony Joshua, through to MMA, think about Israel. Adesanya, think about Kamaru Usman. And multiple sports, the list is endless. And for me, it just seemed that the time was ripe to create an organization which didn't just promote African athletes, but, really was aiming to change and lead combat sports on the continent. And that's what we're doing with African Warriors.
Thank you for that. So as a combat sport lover and also someone who has taken part yourself, for those unfamiliar, how would you actually describe Dambe?
Yeah, so Dambe is a unique form of boxing native to Nigeria, particularly northern Nigeria. And it's sometimes known as the art of the spear and the shield. The roots of Dambe are from warfare, particularly spear and shield warfare. So it's a sport where, a very peculiar sport in that punching only happens with one hand, which is wrapped in a type of rope called kara. And then the other hand is used for blocking, engaging distance. So the goal of it is striking a blow with your wrapped hand, which is known as the spear, and protecting yourself with your unwrapped hand, which is known as the shield. Kicks are also used. The knockdown, which is the goal, symbolizes a kill on the battlefield, so it's known as a kill. So it's a really interesting, exciting sport that has this deep history and culture surrounding it. There's so much, even before you actually get to the point where you have the actual fight, there's a lot of sort of tradition and culture that surrounds the sport. So fighters sort of grew up within a house system where they almost adopted an apprenticeship system into the sport. There's a huge amount of traditional religious beliefs around it. And there's a huge and very deep fandom and ecosystem surrounding the sport across Nigeria. So for me, I just saw this amazing opportunity to sort of take this sport, which is unique to Nigeria, take these fighters who are tough, who are very much seasoned, and bring with them a huge informal fan base, and sort of just modernize it and take it to new audiences. But I can't pretend that we created Dambe. It's not like the UFC, which created MMA, if you will. Dambe was very much there, but we brought in African warriors to give the sport a bigger platform, to lead the modernization of the sport and to take it to global audiences.
You touched on some key elements in terms of the cultural and traditional elements of Dambe. What would you say these elements add that Western combat sports lack?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is a conversation that I have a lot about Dambe in that this sport is very much rooted in culture. And I think what that adds is there's a layer of depth to it that other sports might not have. And that's not to say that it's exciting enough to just see two blokes trying to knock each other out, right? But on top of that, which Dambe has in spades, you have a deep culture and tradition which drives the fighters. And that in itself just lends it to, just offers a level of depth and detail and culture, which I love personally. And to give you an example of that, right? Before any fight, each fighter has a sort of spiritual preparation they do. So fighters have different malams who are like spiritual guides who they consult before a big fight. And each fighter has their sort of particular way of going about it. One of the craziest stories is there's a particular fighter who anytime he fights, he spends the night before the fight sleeping in a graveyard. That's how he gets himself ready for it. So just on a storytelling level, we're just sort of scratching the surface in terms of there's this great depth of stories associated with the sport. And then another demonstration of that is the sport is organized across what's called house lines. So depending on where you're from in Nigeria, particularly northern Nigeria, you are born into one of the Dambe houses. So if you want to compete, you compete to represent that house. The houses are Kudu, aka Kudawa, Arawa, aka Jamus, and Gurumada. And so what that means is you're fighting to represent something bigger than yourself. You're not just competing to represent yourself as Tersa, represent myself as Maxwell, but instead you're carrying a lineage of this house that comes way before you. And what that means in practice is that as fighters are coming in to fight, a big part of the culture of Dambe is music. So you have traditional musicians, you have drummers, and their whole thing is just getting the fighters in this almost trance-like state, getting ready to compete. And the songs they're singing in Hausa, which is the native language, is they're singing songs speaking about the glory of the house this fighter is competing for. And they sort of trace it back. So let's say you and I are fighting, they might say, well, our fathers fought 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So they're speaking about this lineage, which just adds, again, a sort of level of depth to it, which is super interesting.
Amazing. I guess with this, the success that you've created comes growth. We know with growth comes other external or global influences. With this, how have you managed to preserve not just the sport, but I guess the soul of Dambe as AWFC grows globally?
Yeah. So in terms of our global growth, then we can talk more about it, but we've been very, and I say lucky, but, everything has been a result of, planning, and sort of delivering against a strategy, but you can't pretend that we haven't been lucky as well. And so we've had some great growth, over 1 billion views on our content, a huge social media base and followership, and some big headline deals like DAZN, a partnership with DAZN, which is the first deal of its kind. Partnership previously with stake.com, the biggest cryptocurrency gambling firm in the world. So we've done a lot in terms of taking this sport and sort of building the platform for it. And a lot of that has been very much doing that in step with, as you said, preserving the culture of the sport. So, for example, all of our fights take place on sand. And that's very much the tradition, the culture of Dambe. And I think even as we continue to innovate and build the production standards, build the packaging and presentation, it's important that we keep that element, for example. We still have the hand wraps, the traditional hand wraps. We're working on how we refine that. But again, that's very much the essence of Dambe. And it's a funny thing because I've had that conversation with people who have said, oh, why don't you just put them in a boxing ring and give them boxing gloves? And the whole point is this isn't boxing. And partly why we've been able to punch above our weight in terms of building an audience, building a brand for this is because we lean on the traditional culture of this sport. An MMA fan, a boxing fan, which I both am, has the opportunity to watch MMA, to watch boxing in multiple places. But if you want to watch Dambe, you come to us. So it's important for us, I think, to maintain some of the raw elements that set the sport apart from other combat sports. But at the same time, what we continue to try and do is modernize and build sort of production value and standards. So that's everything from outfitting, everything from sort of production in terms of cameras, through to what our events look like. We just launched the Dambe World Series, which is our flagship competition at the moment. And we did that in the National Stadium in Abuja, in Nigeria. And we brought on some solid partners, Warner Music Africa, for example, Chop Life Gaming, Silverbacks, of course, DAZN, of course. So just showing that we can have the modern and sort of top-tier partners stand us alongside Dambe. So it's very much a balance, and I think we've been doing well to strike it. We have more improvements to make, but for us, it's very much the goal. It's not just turning this into another sport, like you can see, because I think that's what makes this interesting. People appreciate the raw nature of it. People appreciate the authentic nature of the sport. So that's very much key to building the brand.
So with this global growth, how have local fighters and locals reacted to the global spotlight being casted on Dambe?
I mean, the fighters are excited. Fighters are excited. These are guys, ultimately, right? The bigger the platform, the better for them. These are prize fighters. They're fighting to provide for themselves, provide for their families. So the bigger the platform, the more opportunities for them. And as well, I think there's just a level of pride in it, right? This is a sport that, as I said, is very much tied to a cultural identity. So being able to see your sport, which is hand in hand with your culture, become bigger, sort of secure more interest on a global level. Fighters take a lot of pride in that. And we've approached it in so many different ways. Last year, for example, we had a milestone moment where we featured the first ever foreign fighter to compete in Dambe. So we brought him over from Merseyside, actually, Luke Leyland, born and bred sort of Englishman, and he came over to compete in Dambe. And why that's exciting, because it just speaks to the globalization now of the sort of competitors of the sport as well. So as I said, we have this big global audience in terms of interest, and now we're bringing in more global fighters. So yeah, everything, every step ultimately just speaks to the fighters being happier in terms of their sport being known and more opportunities coming for them and better rewards.
You touched on the growth of the organization being part luck and part planning strategy. What role would you say your background in corporate communication and also brand building played in shaping the identity and growth of AWFC?
Yeah, it's definitely played a big role. So as you said, my background's in corporate comms. So that's working with companies, working with high-profile individuals on building, managing reputations. And so I was very much able to employ that experience in the early days in terms of understanding and presenting what African Warriors needs to look like. And I'll sort of be honest with you as well. I'll tell you a story, right, in terms of how we came up with African Warriors like this. Initially, as I said, I saw this exciting opportunity when it comes to combat sports in Africa. And particularly, I saw the MMA opportunity.
Yeah.
The UFC 2016 sold for $4 billion. This is an organization that was bought, I think, in the early noughties for about $2 million, right?
Yeah.
So a huge and very exciting, return. And I thought, why are we not building an African MMA organization? We have the talent, we have a huge amount of interest in sports, we have very set and very proud tribal identities, which just speak to competition. And I sort of got to Nigeria. I was based in London at the time fully, and I get to Nigeria and I spent some time just going around, understanding the landscape. And as I carried on doing that, it was an Uber driver actually who we have to thank for this. He was taking me around and he said to me, he's like, you like this fighting stuff, right? Let me show you something. So he took me to go and watch Dambe. So he took me to a bit of a funny part of town. And instantly I see Dambe for the first time and I'm blown away. Like you have all of the energy of this sport, right? It's just like sort of on show. And this is outside under a bridge, right? But you have the musicians going off, you have the fighters who are displaying, who are dancing, who are all just going for it. And they're singing. And I sort of asked them, I said, what are they singing? And he said, they're singing, the time for killing has come. Don't worry, if you die, we'll take you home to your village and bury you.
Wow.
And I was like, man, you know what I mean? Like, this has to be it. Like, rather than build an organization which just looks like the UFC, right? Looks like a sort of a less funded African equivalent. Let's do something which speaks to the culture, which speaks to the traditions of Nigeria, of Africa more widely. And that's how we decided on African Warriors. And thinking about that, being able to make that link, being able to think about what a brand needs to look like. You can look at our logo, for example. It's the continent of Africa with two fighting figures within it. Everything about how we present this brand is very much proudly, loudly African, but at the same time, it's a global brand, and that's what we're pushing for. So I think it's definitely, you know, my background in the space, that sort of level of imagination to that, and how many years later it's going well.
So through this process, what would you say are some of the lessons you've learned about exporting tradition or culture to a global audience?
The key thing has been authenticity. Culture is very much, I think now is an amazing time for Nigerian and more widely African culture. If you think Afro beats, if you think Amapiano, if you think Nollywood, I think we're speaking with a new level of confidence when it comes to all things African on a global level. And we're finding that there's more and more global interest and there's a global market for this. So I think for us, it was just channeling that in the way of sport. So it was having a sport and sort of showcasing Dambe in a way that is authentic to the sport, the culture of it, be it the houses, be it the presentation of the fights, all of these things, and just pushing that. And to be honest, as we've still got a long way to go in taking this till its final form. There's still more stories to tell. There's still so many more things to present. I'll give you an example, right? I shouldn't have favorites, but one of my favorite fighters is a guy called Coronavirus.
I like the name.
I know, right? so it's like, literally, right? His name is Coronavirus. And this guy he's everything you would want in terms of he's a showman, but he has amazing performances. He's personable, he's easy to work with, right? But then when you think about his background story, he's the second of 11 children, grew up in a village in Kano State in northern Nigeria, grew up in a one-room mud hut, if you will, which is probably smaller than the size of your living room. And he grew up with just him and his mother and his siblings. And ultimately, if you think about the indicators, if you think about where he's coming from, right, this is a guy that he could very easily have fell into very sort of a negative situation, right? This is technically the poverty capital of Nigeria, which by some indications is the poverty capital of the world. And he's coming from the part of Nigeria that has struggled when it comes to with terrorism, with poverty, with illiteracy, all of these things, right? Not to say that these aren't sort of full Nigeria-wide problems, but instead he's seen this and he gravitated towards Dambe. And at first, his mum didn't want him to do it, but he quickly had a natural talent for it. And he grew that talent into becoming a local champion. And now he is a big name in Dambe. He has a sort of huge fan base of it. He's been able to make some great money, win prizes, and now he uses that to take care of his family. And so why I say that is just to say that we are literally just scratching the surface on the stories we can tell. The sort of underdog story coming from a hard background to go and compete in combat sports, that's not unique to Dambe. That's a Rocky story, that's a boxing story, it's an MMA story. But just the nature of the conditions we're working with, where these guys are coming from, just how bad can be in this part of the world, and just how raw this actual sport is, I think just speaks to how exciting what we're doing is and the impact we're having.
This is Virtual Corner, where we bring clarity to cross-border risk. Today, we're looking at fraud, how to spot it early and stop it fast. Here's Natasha Biddle, Senior Compliance Manager at Virtual, on staying ahead of the threats. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you very much, Tessa. Happy to be here, and thank you for having me. So I'm going to cover the fast evolving fraud landscape, and then I'm going to talk through some of the most underestimated and emerging threats and the best way for businesses to build up their defense against them. So we know that fraud has always been around, but fast forward to today, and we're not dealing with Nigerian princes anymore. Instead, we're dealing with AI voice clones, deep fakes, and business and vendor email compromise attacks that look more legitimate than the real thing, to be honest. So it's very, very hard to detect. But I'll go into more details about those later on. Firstly, let's begin with a powerful stat, just to give you guys a bit more context as to the issue that we're dealing with here. Between 2023 and 2024, the UK fraud losses hit an eye-watering £11.4 billion. And that was 4 billion higher than the previous year. So I'll just let that sink in. I'm going to break down what we're seeing in the real world, what's emerging, what's underestimated, and how we as businesses can protect ourselves and each other. So the most underestimated threat we're seeing right now is AI-powered impersonation fraud, especially in the form of deepfake audio and video used in payment diversion scams. Case example, last year, a UK engineering consultancy called Arup, there was a financial officer working for Arup who received a video call from what appeared to be the CFO. And in this call, the CFO was urgently instructing him to authorize multiple transfers totaling up to £20 million. From the officer's point of view, he's seeing his CFO. He's hearing his CFO's voice. So as much as the request was suspicious, he went ahead and he executed the instructions. It's not science fiction. It's happening right now, and it's very, very difficult to detect from your eyes and also from your ears. Another area flying under the radar is synthetic identity fraud. And this is essentially where fraudsters create entirely new personas using bits of real and fake data. So think of someone who actually doesn't exist, opening accounts, building credit for months and months and months, and then suddenly defaulting. And the banks, they only find out after a long period of time when the synthetic trail vanishes. And then there's also the business and vendor email compromise attacks. Still, this is one of the most profitable scams. I'll give you an example. In 2020, Red Kites, which is a community housing organization, lost over £930,000 due to this style of attack. So when one of the payments was due, the fraudsters conjured up a very perfectly timed email saying, "Hello, we've just updated our bank details. Please send your payment to," and then they listed their own bank details, of course. And the money was sent straight to them, just like that. £930,000 gone in a matter of seconds. And the reason these threats are so dangerous is because they don't just exploit technology, they exploit trust. And in financial services and business as well, trust is basically our most valuable currency.
Before we wrap things up, one last question. What's one key change in company culture or training that helps prevent fraud?
So the golden question to your question ultimately is, how do we fight back? It's tempting to throw tech at the problem. Machine learning, biometrics, behavioral analytics. And don't get me wrong, there's some really, really innovative solutions right now on the market, and we do need them. But, and this is a big but, none of it matters if your people can't spot the signs or staff feel afraid to challenge something suspicious. So, what needs to change? First, we have to ditch the, that would never happen here mindset. Think about it. Fraud isn't just a risk. It's a certainty. Go look at your spam folder if you don't believe me. The only variable is how well you're prepared. Second, we need to empower staff, especially in payments, finance, and operational teams, to slow down. Fraud loves urgency. So if you get an email that says, transfer this now or we'll lose the deal, people's main instinct is to comply, just like the Arab financial officer during that video call. Actually, we should be saying, hang on, 1 second, let me just verify this. Training, it needs to be ongoing. And in my opinion, it needs to be scenario-based. And then there's a cultural shift we don't talk about enough, which is rewarding caution. In many companies, if you delay a payment, you're often seen as a bottleneck, and we need to change that. If you ask the right questions and don't process a suspicious payment, that's not slowing down business, that's actually protecting business. A couple of years ago, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners reported that 42% of fraud cases globally were initially uncovered through whistleblower reports. And over 50% of those reports came from internal employees. So we've come a long way from the days of Prince Azubike. And we know that fraud is evolving faster than ever. And we know also that it thrives on haste. And you can have the best reg tech in the world, but ultimately your best defense will always be your people. And so we all need to be actively fostering a culture of accountability. Thank you.
Big thanks to Natasha Biddle for that crucial breakdown on fraud protection. For fraud fighting resources and compliance tools, check out the links in the episode notes. We'll be back soon with more on Virto Corner. And now back to our interview. You've touched on the challenges in transforming an informal community-based sport into a commercial entertainment product, which has obviously led to some important partnerships, primarily with DAZN. What does this mean for Dambe and AWFC on a global scale?
Yeah, so what we've just touched on is our broadcast partnership with DAZN. So this is the first of its kind. And what it means is that DAZN is the Netflix of sports, if you will, biggest streaming platform globally for sports, full stop. The FIFA World Cup, which just concluded, was on there. Boxing, Matchroom Boxing, which is Eddie Hearn's outfit, which represents Anthony Joshua and a number of the biggest fighters in the world, and a number of other sports are all on DAZN. So what it means is it's a huge credibility builder for the sport in terms of this is the first time this sport and a sport like this is being shown on global platforms. So it just highlights the growth that we have in terms of reaching global combat sports fans, global sports fans, full stop. So it's just a very exciting step. It highlights a level of growth. It highlights that we are now at the point where we are taking social media clout, of which we have a lot, over 1.2 billion views, over 1 million followers. And we're now translating that into building a proper sports broadcast product. And that's not an easy feat. And especially when you're, as you said, right, this is a community grassroots sport that we're taking to this. So it just speaks to exciting growth. It speaks to a recognition of what we're doing. And it just sort of further puts us along the path of being what the goal is, which is the leading name when it comes to African combat sports. And at the same time, being a global name in African combat sports. In combat sports, full stop, not just Africa.
So if we keep on the theme of partnerships, I know you've also been backed by Silverbacks Holdings, which is amazing, and DAZN. How did you secure these partnerships? Was it a long process, or was it something that was quite quick and, I guess, just made sense?
Yeah, I think you'd be very familiar with this, that, nothing is done in a day and everything has its roots from somewhere else.
Yes.
So I think all of the work we've done over the years has worked towards securing both of the partnerships you just mentioned, because our first priority was proving this, was proving interest, and was proving how far this can go. And what that meant is we spent a lot of time first interfacing with the community to win their trust, being able to access the best athletes, understand the space. And then we started putting on our own events, each event being a bit bigger than the last one. And then we eventually got to the point with Silverbacks, for example, where Ibrahim, the chairman there, who, very much a respected name in African media and sport, we were introduced through a mutual contact. And when we had the conversation, I think it became very clear that we both stand for a lot of the same things. Silverbacks as an organization is sort of betting on companies who are trying to realize Africa's future, who are exporting sort of African culture or African businesses in many ways. So I think the alignment was very much a natural alignment. And ultimately, we had the numbers to back up and to sort of capture that interest in terms of partnerships, in terms of viewership, in terms of interest. As far as DAZN goes, similar sort of thing in that the platform continues to grow. It's very much known as one of the homes of combat sports globally. So with us possessing a unique sport that speaks to an African audience, but at the same time speaks to a global audience, because what a lot of people wouldn't understand is, although this is very much an African product, it has sort of global relevance. Our biggest markets in terms of interest are Nigeria, the US, and Brazil. So we're reaching global combat sports fans. So I think for DAZN, it was just a conversation in terms of showing that, look, we have this sport. It's very much, we're at the ground floor stage in terms of our growth of this. But we already have great indicators that showcase the value we would offer your platform. And from there, we're quite easily able to do a deal. So I think the key thing is we did the work in the background that got us to the dance, if you will, both with Silverbacks and them coming on board as an investor and DAZN as a broadcast partner.
Amazing. Earlier, we touched on, I guess, what you're doing to ensure with the growth that you don't lose authenticity as Dambe becomes more commercial and international. With that international success, what we are seeing is that fighters are now facing international opponents. So how are AWFC athletes, I guess the local ones, how are they preparing to compete on a world stage while staying true also to their traditional style?
I mean, they're doing what they've always done, which is fight. I think it's, I think we can leave the over-explanation and the sort of strategic stuff for us at a corporate level, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to a Dambe fighter, these guys, they're not new to this. They've been competing in this for years. They've been competing first in their sort of local village settings through to sort of making it to the big cities and the big stadiums. So they're very experienced. They're very much primed they're primed for the big stage. I've definitely seen, and it's very good that, I think with every sport, the more it grows, the more it professionalizes, right? So athletes are definitely taking their preparation more seriously. training in terms of strength training, in terms of technique training, in terms of the lifestyles they need to live in order to be the best athletes. We're seeing a solid uptick in that, and we're supporting them in doing that. So I think for them, it's quite simple, right? Be the best athletes they can be. So that's just taking all of the necessary preparation before events and before competing, and ultimately do what you've been doing for years. Do what your sort of ancestors have also been doing, which is come and give the best fights. And that I think is partly the easy part, if you will. Not that what they do is easy, but I think they have already practiced that and it's instinctual at this moment. For them, it's the same thing. If it's a guy from Merseyside or if it's somebody from the next village over, they compete to represent themselves, represent their house, and ultimately make a living. And the bigger the stage, the better.
Thank you for sharing that. So with the growth, I guess, requires more events, more fighters. So what is it that you're doing in terms of training a pipeline or a network across Nigeria for more athletes in Dambe and combat sports?
Yeah, so the great thing about working with an existing ecosystem like we do with Dambe is that we position African Warriors as the Champions League of Dambe, if you will, in that every single day across Nigeria, there are Dambe fights taking place, in particular across the sort of bigger northern states, right? So you have an entire ecosystem of stadiums through to marketplaces where you have people competing. And we work with those communities to spot and get access to the best talent. So we have a network of spotters, a grassroots network of partners where we access talent across Nigeria, and then the best get the call up to compete. So it's working with our grassroots partners. We also have state government partnerships as well. So it's working across that value chain in terms of accessing the best fighters. And as we grow, we continue to invest in that network, be it offering sort of opportunities for better training, better opportunities for taking care of themselves, anything that ultimately works towards them being the best they can be.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I guess historically, culturally, Dambe has been a male-led sport. What role do you see for women in AWFC and other indigenous African combat sports?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? And it's a conversation I have, especially with people taking an international lens on this.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, Dambe is very much, as I've mentioned, a traditional sport. So we have to be alive to cultural sensitivities.
Yeah.
If you watch an event, for example, you'll notice we don't have like ring girls like you have in boxing or MMA, right? We don't have sort of ladies in bikinis because it just doesn't speak to the cultural sensitivities of the overwhelmingly sort of Muslim community which Dambe comes from. And that sort of is further seen in terms of there's always been a very limited amount of participation in Dambe for women. So we're open to sort of changing that, but it has to come from the community. We can't do anything to sort of impose that on the communities. As far as African Warriors go, we're a platform for the best Dambe athletes. It started with men, but I think eventually it can get to women. But it needs to be done in a way which is respectful of the culture and carries along sort of the stakeholders of the sport.
I agree 100%. So keeping on the theme of change, I know we've spoken about this or touched on it a few times during the conversation in terms of participation of international fighters. So how has the participation of international fighters such as Luke Leyland, how has that shaped perceptions of Dambe inside and outside of Africa?
I think it's just showcased that this is something that, I mean, we've following Luke's fight, right? We've had so many inquiries, so many people coming to us to say, look, I'm from this part of the world and I want to compete. So I think it's just opened the doors in terms of people knowing that wherever they're coming from, there's an opportunity and potentially the chance for them to compete in Dambe. It very much sparked the Dambe World Series, which is what I've spoken about in terms of the concept of the World Series is highlighting the best Dambe fighters in the world, full stop. So that's going to be the best of Nigeria taking on fighters from other countries. So I think it just speaks to representation. Very much a lot of the time comes before participation, right? So people sort of see themselves represented and think, okay, I'm going to have a try. I'm a boxer from the US. I'm going to try and compete in Dambe. I'm a Muay Thai fighter from Thailand. I'm going to try this. So I think it very much speaks to the future of the sport. I think this is how the sport gets better in terms of people bringing different techniques and approaches from their home countries or from other sports into Dambe. And that only just sort of rises the level of competition that we see. So I just think this is very much the start of the internationalization of the sport. You can watch it now on a global level, be it through DAZN, be it across social media. Increasingly, you're going to see people from different countries competing, and it just speaks to the global growth and aspirations we have for the sport.
As you mentioned, the involvement of international athletes has created a awareness from a new audience, which is a new trend. So keeping on the theme of trends, have you noticed any emerging trends in how African combat sports are perceived globally that you're excited about?
Yeah, I just think more and more interest. Usually the start of engagement with us as well. I didn't know this existed. But increasingly, I'm speaking to people from around the world who are like, oh, yeah, I've heard about it. Oh, yeah, I've heard about what you guys do, and I'm excited about it. So I just think awareness is growing. I think there's always been a respect for the raw talent Africa offers, be it in sports, but through to any space, right? And I think there's now a sort of growing interest in, okay, wow, we're now translating that into a local but global organization that represents Africa.
Fantastic. So if we go from current trends and look to the future, where do you see AWFC and Dambe in, say, the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh man, I see a lot. I see when I look at Dambe, I see that's Nigeria's combat sports export. So in the same way we have karate, Thailand has Muay Thai, multiple Western countries can sort of lay claim to boxing. That's what we consider Dambe to be. So that is going to continue to grow. I see that resulting in bigger and better fights, the level of competition continually increasing, and the sport being practiced across the world, not just in Nigeria. As far as African Warriors goes, there's a reason why our name is African Warriors, because we represent Africa as a whole. And so we're not just beholden to Dambe. African Warriors as an organization is going to grow into the largest combat sports platform on the continent. And what that means is we are going to feature multiple sports under the African Warriors umbrella. So we are growing to be your one-stop shop for combat sports on the continent. So Dambe will continue to grow and will continue to push that. Dambe gave us the opportunity to showcase what we have coming out of Nigeria, to build a brand, to build awareness. But it's not just limited to there. So it's going to be Dambe, it's going to be other indigenous combat sports. Senegal, for example, has a huge culture of wrestling, which is their biggest, their national sport. And then it also extends to other sports, be it MMA, be it boxing, be it Western style pro wrestling and the rest of it. So we are going to have multiple sports under the African Warriors umbrella. We are going to be producing content across these sports and distributing globally across our own and partner platforms. We are going to be the leading sort of producer of African combat sports talent and play a role in terms of placing that talent around the world. And the list goes on. So this is very much the start of it. And it's a very exciting time. I get very excited when I look towards the future of what we're growing.
I'm very excited to see how this develops as a combat sport lover myself, which I failed to mention at the beginning. I guess with what you've just mentioned, what I wanted to touch on is how do you hope Dambe or even the organization AWFC influences primarily how the world views African culture and combat sports in the future?
That's a great question. I think just the respect for the combat sports culture that we have here. This is a long-standing culture, hundreds, if not thousands of years old. These are some of the toughest athletes competing in some of the toughest conditions. And ultimately, I think the beautiful thing about combat sports is everybody understands it. You don't need to speak Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, English or whatever. You can see two men competing, sitting or standing on sand, trying to knock each other out, and you get it instantly. Doesn't need much explanation. At my big age, I still don't actually understand American football, for example.
I thought I was the only one, but I watch Netflix documentaries religiously.
Mate, I have no idea. Absolutely no idea. And it's funny, there's my wife is Nigerian American, and has tried to explain it to me, and I still have no idea what's going on, right? But it is what it is, right? But you don't have that problem with Dambe, and you don't have that problem with any combat sport. You get it, you see it, you know what's going on. So it translates so well. So I just want there to be an appreciation for sort of what we have going on here. I think it's universally accepted that we have some of the best, if not the best, athletic talent coming out of Africa, right? So everybody knows that. And now we're seeing an understanding and a growing appreciation for the art forms that we have here. I just want us to sort of continue leading that, and I want that to continue growing.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are good or when times are challenging. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
I think it's more of a, I won't give you the full quote, but it's more of a philosophy in terms of an approach, which is the concept of being the man in the arena. I think it's very easy to have opinions. It's very easy to suggest ideas and strategies. But I believe the goal should always be the doing and the execution. To be the man in the arena, the man sort of executing, is very difficult, especially in this space that we exist in, be it Nigeria, be it the sport that we're pushing. So I take a great amount of pride in just not myself, but our team as well, in terms of being able to execute, being able to take something and grow something from sort of a grassroots sport to a global brand. So the approach is always to execute, a bias towards execution, put one foot in front of the other, accept that it's not always going to be perfect, accept that it's going to be scrappy, accept that mistakes will be made, but continue towards pushing and a bias towards action. And that's always been how I try to approach this.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. What a fantastic way to end today's conversation. Thanks, Maxwell, for sharing your journey and vision with us. I think it's clear that African Warriors Fighting Championship isn't just about building or platforming a sport. It's also about carving a cultural legacy and also taking it global. Fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and looking forward to seeing what happens in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.